So, David, this week there wasn't a tremendous amount of fanfare. And of course, the Democrats who are in the Senate are not in a position to pass legislation. But this is very much where we start to see where people are situated and what kind of positions we can see coming down the pike, as it were. And Senator Elizabeth Warren came out with a fascinating proposal, which I think might be one of the most radical proposals we've seen from a top senator, like a prominent senator, in a long time in this country. Am I right about that assessment?
Well, I mean, if you describe socialism as ownership of the means of production, then this is a deeply socialist proposal to have the government step in where there's a market failure in the generic drug market and actually manufacture generic drugs at an affordable price so people can access them. I'd say that's pretty radical.
I mean, it occurs to me that the Democratic socialists that we have who ran in the last election may run in this one too. Bernie Sanders, of whom I am a great admirer. I don't know that he has offered any proposal that is to the left of that. I mean, and frankly, I mean, we'll go through the details, but I mean, I just want to characterize it. This is and this is not one that I think people associate necessarily with Elizabeth Warren. I don't perceive. I don't think she brands herself as a socialist or a democratic socialist in any way.
Quite the opposite. She has said, "I'm a capitalist to my toes," or "a capitalist my bones." She sees it as clearly a situation where a market is failing and needs to be fixed, and here's a way to fix it. I should say that the same sort of coalition partners that help put together and nurture this proposal from Senator Warren also were involved in the proposal just last month from Bernie Sanders that also deals with prescription drugs in a different sense. That bill says that anytime prices are excessive relative to what people pay for drugs throughout the world in industrialized countries, that the government can essentially seize the patent and allow other entities to manufacture it. So
this is the Prescription Drug Price Relief Act, right? Is that what we're talking about, or is this the low?
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's great, and that's pretty radical in and of itself, because
without
the
a doubt
set up this system where patents would be the way that pharmaceutical companies can recoup their R&D costs. And Sanders is saying this doesn't work, so we're going to just take the patents and make sure that people can get their drugs affordably. The problem with that is that the generic drug market in many cases does not work in terms of giving people more affordable drugs. And so this is a complement to that, with Warren saying, okay, in situations where it does not work, we're going to just have government make these drugs, which, drugs are very cheap to make. That's kind of the hidden secret here,
right?
Is that to mass manufacture prescription drugs is not a big deal. The money goes into sort of the R&D, and then, of course, into the marketing and overhead and paying off doctors to prescribe, and that's where the money goes in prescription drugs, and that's why drugs are so high, absent the price controls that you see everywhere else in the world. And also, of course, much of it goes into the treasuries of these companies, because profit margins in the drug industry are higher than any practically other industry that we see.
Okay. Now, part of the reason why I wanted to start this so inflammatorily is because if Elizabeth Warren ends up running for president, that's the way the approach is going to be. But as we start to break down the proposal, right, we start to see, like, this notion of the government, being in the business of making these drugs is really not that big of a deal, and is a very common sense response to a significant ongoing problem that is both obvious in terms of it being problematic, but also, severe insofar as the implications for individuals. Now, I will say this, right. Only, I guess, about a month or two ago, the VA, back in April, the VA announced that they were going to be making some generic drugs. The reasons why they would, in what instances, it has more to do with supply than anything else. But so the idea of the government
the Trump administration is doing this right
That's
now.
Right.
And you can say the same thing for Sanders' bill about, an international index of prices, and if they're too high, the government steps in and licenses them. The Trump administration has that proposal right now for a very small class of drugs that are administered at hospitals. They're called Medicare Part B drugs. So they're only for Medicare, and they're only ones that are administered within the hospital. But they say prices are too high internationally. We're going to force the payment on those to be at the same level as what other countries in the world are paying. In other words, there is bipartisan agreement on this, that there are solutions to the high cost of prescription drugs. And though they will be painted as radical, both parties, including the Trump administration, have used these solutions.
This is really, I think the key to assessing all of these proposals. That is, this is not a question of, are these radical solutions? This is not a question of, are these problems real? It's simply a question of determining, when do we choose to exercise these solutions? How urgent is...
And what's radical, right, is the fact that we have these drugs that their patent is done, the exclusivity period is over, and yet 40% of all generic drug markets have only one player in them. The entire point of this system was that after the exclusivity period, other companies will rush in and create competition to drive down the cost of these. But increasingly what we see is that one company goes in and dominates the generic market. There's actually an active investigation going on right now into collusion among generic drug manufacturers who are divvying up markets and, sort of making non-compete agreements to not move in onto somebody else's turf. And we're talking about 300 drugs among 16 companies. And this is a federal antitrust investigation for price fixing that's going on right now. So this market is broken. And Senator Warren has come up with a way that you could potentially fix it.
Okay. All right. So now that we've gotten all the sort of the ideological assessments of it, I want to come back. I want to take a break. I want to walk through this very carefully so that people understand what is the nature of the problem and what is the nature of the proposed solution, and where will this take us, and how this is going to play into the presidential election, because if you look at the Senate now, and just on the issue of drugs alone, right, there are the names of people. We have the Cure High Drug Prices Act. We have the Low Drug Prices Act. We have the Drug Price Relief Act. We also now have the Affordable Drug Manufacturing Act. These are all proposed legislation put forth by Democratic senators, and I think all of them are people who, if you made a list today, who's going to run for president, all of them would be on it. We will talk more about this and what it's going to mean in actual practice after the break.